Well, I went to the movie having read the reviews, so my expectations were lowered. And I'd have to say that I was mildly surprised. It's reasonably entertaining, although I certainly, as a post scholar, found many problems with it. This is a movie that obviously is created by contemporary filmmakers. I think the guy who made V for Vendetta made this. And it seemed to me that after watching all of the trailers before the movie started, in which people were getting blown up, torn up, shot to pieces, knifed up, that was a perfect preparation for the film, because one of the things that you discover in this film right away is that it's incredibly gory. Now, true, there's a lot of violence in Poe, or at least there are violent moments, and there are some disgusting images. But Poe doesn't spend the entire story sort of wallowing in them, and in fact, that's not where the main interest lies. But in this movie, there was a huge attention to close-ups of mutilated bodies and blood spewing out. I don't want to spoil this for anyone, but you know, you you need to be warned. Another problem that I had with the movie is that this was clearly made to appeal to a contemporary audience. And I guess the producers concluded that the only way a movie could do that would be to have characters who speak as people tend to speak in the 21st century. And so instead of having folks talk and exercise a certain amount of Victorian restraint, there were lots of epithets and lots of language that you would certainly not have heard in Poe's time in public conversations. I've read through all of Poe's letters, and I can tell you he doesn't use the F word once, and John Cusack did several times. So that was one element that I found off-putting. There's also, I mean, they went to great lengths to create a likeness of dress and hairstyle. And that part of the film I thought worked very well. There's one really beautiful scene where John Cusack as Poe is reciting The Raven to a room full of lovely young women. And they all look as if they'd stepped out of the pages of Godey's Ladies magazine. They have perfectly appropriate mid-19th century frocks on, perfectly appropriate ringlets, braids in their hair. And these are styles that were absolutely perfect, as far as I'm concerned, for, you know, a story that is set in 1849. But what they completely miss is the way that in that time, people, especially men and women, maintained very proper relationships to each other. And as I was telling a student a while ago, in the 19th century, it was a sufficient sign of your intention that you wish to marry to kiss. This movie takes us where contemporary movies always do, to a character who's got a hot romantic relationship with a really lovely young blonde. And you know, to see Poe kind of climbing on this woman was just, that was an iconoclastic moment for me. And anyone who knows how absolutely reticent Poe was about anything closely resembling romantic passion would have been, you know, kind of shocked by this. But, you know, the movie is made to appeal, and it does appeal, and the plot line, the story of a serial killer who has been inspired by Poe and who weaves clues into each of his murders that are inspired by Poe tales is ingenious, and for those folks who have read Poe, it's kind of fun to tease out the pieces and to see how these elements have been used. Frankly, the notion that any reader of the 1840s, any reader of Poe, would have been such a fan as to want to commit crimes to inspire Poe to write more tales is really silly. But that's the premise of the movie, that there is some secret fan who uses these crimes to leverage Poe to write another tale if he wants to end this. But of course that never works, because every time Poe writes another tale, there's another murder. So it's a movie with certain contradictions in the plot. Well, the ending of the movie leads to Poe's solution of this sequence of crimes, his discovery that behind this string of grisly murders is a disgruntled typesetter who has always envied Poe and admired Poe, and in part he's driven by the desire to prod Poe to write more tales. But there's clearly an element of irrationality, and I thought that the character who plays the role was pretty good in that moment. But finally, in order to discover where this fellow has secreted the body of Poe's beloved, he tells Poe that he has to drink a cup of poison. And Poe eventually does do that, and the guy gives him the clue that allows him to figure out that his beloved Emily, the blonde, is locked up in a coffin beneath the floor, where they are sitting and talking, straight out of the Telltale Heart. And there's something about the end that's kind of stagey, and the end of the movie, the closing shot, shows Poe wobbling out to a park bench and apparently expiring as he's gazing up at the sky. That's not true. He died in a hospital, and they did get the doctor's name right. It was Dr. Moran, who attended Poe at the end, at the very end. And they also did something very interesting. A puzzle for Poe scholars is that we've never known exactly why Poe was saying, almost at the point of death, the name Reynolds. Reynolds. In this movie, they have very cleverly made that Poe's last attempt to reveal the name of the murderer to the police. The typesetter was named Reynolds. So the end of the movie gives you a kind of abrupt form of justice, in that even as Poe expires, the police detective is already shooting off to Paris, and somehow miraculously he gets to Paris before the typesetter, who has decided to go off and, I guess, look for Jules Verne or something like that. So in quite a strange turn at almost the last scene of the movie, you get the police detective shooting the shooting the villain, and that's it. As Woody Woodpecker said, that's all, folks.